This episode of Ticket Volume is brought to you by us, Invigate. Get service operations under control in no time. Get 1 free month of our software solution by going to try.invigate.com. Ticket Volume is proud to present an esteemed panel of 4 guests today. Good luck, Matt, trying to wrangle all these opinions. We have Daniel Breston, a self-described old man of ITSM who is retired now, but doing what he wants, which is spending time helping IT folks with mental health issues. Joined by Simone Jo Moore, a leader in humanizing IT, a master of emotional agility and artificial intelligence, a recognized top 25 industry thought leader and Women in DevOps designee. Joined by Jacob White, a passionate and results-oriented fractional head of customer success, a consultant advisor with a rich background in both sales and support. He takes immense pride in building up organizations from the ground up and optimizing existing teams for peak performance. And also Kincy Clark, a leader with 12 years of strong team leadership, program management, strategy, operations, communications, and technical experience that builds strong customer relationships, increases customer retention, and creates a successful win-win partnership with clients. Welcome to Ticket Volume Live, an opportunity to be the news and information for improving IT experiences. I'm your host, Matt Beran. Each week, I get to hype up leaders to share their insights on service management, technology, and business. And this episode is going to bring more of the same energy. I hope you've had a good week. And I also hope that you'll get involved today by asking a question in chat or providing your insights as we're speaking. So now let's begin. Welcome, Simone, Jacob, Kincy, Daniel to Ticket Volume.
Hello.
Hello. Hola.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. Thank you for taking some time to be here. And what a great topic. I've been racking my brain trying to find good questions. And so if you're in the audience today, please take a moment to put in a question because, of course, I've found some across the internet. But you know how the internet is. There's trash everywhere. So if you've got something you want answered or there's something you're looking to get out of this episode, throw it into chat. We'll see it no matter what platform you're on, and we'll bring you into the discussion. So let's get started with one of my questions right away, because I hear this term all the time. In fact, we put it in the title for this episode, and I have no freaking clue what it is. What is a staffing model? Who can answer that for me?
I'll take the bait.
Go for it, Kincy, please.
So a staffing model is something you use to plan and forecast staffing. And I think there's a lot of different techniques to do that. And it depends really on the maturity of the company, how detailed and how granular you want to get, and also like how predictable your future is. But I think it's important to differentiate between kind of a staffing model, which is how you're going to grow and develop your organization over time, versus a staffing model that's used to plan shifts and things like that. So I think there's 2 flavors of that, very different models. And I think they sometimes get confused. Sometimes like CFOs, resource managers want to know the staffing model. Support leaders will show up with their staffing plan for the week or the month, and that's not necessarily what they're looking for. So I would argue a staffing models, again, it's how you model your staffing into the future, planning for growth, planning for additional hires, the requirements you have to maintain a successful team.
Okay, so it's like the algorithm. It's the inputs, the metrics, the measures, the KPIs, and then what you're doing with your staffing is either trying to, manipulate those things, reach success, or it's all the other stuff from this episode that follows this question, right? And that's the stuff that you're going to be putting into your staffing model. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of different ways I prefer not to drive mine with operational metrics. I really want to tie my staffing model to business outcomes and then what the business is forecasting, because if sales is predicting, a massive jump of customers, I want to be prepared for that. And I also want to be aligned with that. And I think, again, this is where people, when you confuse your staffing model with kind of your staffing plan, you can get into trouble. So it's really important to
Yes.
align with business outcomes and business growth, because ultimately that's going to drive your resources, not so much what your MTTR is or things like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, I think
Cool.
Kincy has hit on a really important point, because I've always looked at model with an art and a science. So there has to actually be always driven by what's needed from the outcomes downwards. But, coming from also a high-end call center background, of course, we did go right into the deep science of things like the Erlang C models and things like that. But I don't think you can be really good at those and successful at those unless you've considered all those different risk factors, capabilities, how we actually bring teams together, what form the teams might take. So there really is, there are formulas that work really well, but if you don't know the top end stuff, if you don't understand the business patterns, and if you don't understand what they're trying to get out of it, you are not successfully going to meet those scheduling right down even to the shift level.
Yeah. Okay, that kind of makes sense, because that's why we have all the measures that we have. I saw a post recently about average handle time. It was the leader of support for, I think, Sun Country Airlines, and he was talking about how he uses average handle time. And I beat up on that metric all the time because, of course, it's one of those tricky things. You don't necessarily want to share it because possibly people will lower their average handle time to the point where they're being rude to customers. But really, I think your point, Simone, is that you need to be aware of all the things that are happening so that it can influence your staffing model. And I think that's a great point. So let's move on to a new tip, because one of the challenges right now, one of the biggest challenges in our industry, I think anyway, or the thing that I keep hearing about, is turnover and hiring. So let's do a round of everyone. What do you do about turnover? And we'll start with Mr. Jacob.
Well, I mean, turnover is obviously a difficult scenario, especially if you have high turnover. So really, it's just attempting to prevent as high of turnover as you possibly can from the get-go. I feel that is, obviously what you need to address. But if you are in the middle of high turnover, just ensuring that the existing team is well supported and has enough resources to be successful in what they're supposed to be doing. Resetting expectations for both yourself and upper management to ensure that, hey, we're understaffed temporarily. So therefore, everyone is on the same page of what's happening. It can be better communicated to the customers, if that was required, or any other need that you have to do. But just planning that out as best as you possibly can, and then getting new hires on as quickly as possible so you can onboard them and get them to the appropriate levels of knowledge that you need them to be. And then, it's always a good time to be looking for new tooling and other things that might be able to help alleviate some of the pressure that you could be having with a lower head count than what you believe you need. So reanalyzing some of those processes and operations in that regard.
Excellent response. Daniel, you've got anything to add?
I'm going to go and flip the coin upside down. Before COVID, I agree with everything that Jacob just said. After COVID, we have this great redundancy that occurred, where all kinds of people were made redundant, and great resignation because people decided that with a couple of clicks, they could go and join somebody else in the digital universe. And now turnover is fluid, because depending on what you want to do and the skills that you require, your turnover and your new staffing to fill those slots that open can just kind of occur because of what's happening in your environment. If the British government all of a sudden says, well, this is what's going to happen, and these are the new things that we're going to bring in, and this is now going to be on our, staffing or on our manifesto for our election next year, then all of a sudden, everything that you thought you were going to do is no longer what you need to do to stay alive. So turnover to me is quite fluid, and because of that, the model that you have for your organization is like a piece of clay, or maybe like the old Mission Impossible thing where, okay, this is what you need to do today. Let me go and get the pictures that I need or build the clay that I need to, to be able to create what the organization will look like now based on skills and capabilities, not necessarily on numbers of people and what they cost.
Wow. I think that's pretty forward looking as far as like thinking about skills and capabilities versus butts and chairs. That's a big shift over the last couple of years then. Simone, have you got something to add?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I think people forget about, especially for service desk or call centers, like regardless of those front end teams that we're putting together, is a dynamic that it's ever changing, and that balance between automation and the desire for what's actually wanted by the business or by the customers. I mean, let's face it, you can't provide a $6 million service on $6. That just doesn't happen that way. So I think they have to wake up to the reality of what the necessities are, and and also wonder at the amazing capability that actually lies within their people. If you want it to be sustainable, if you actually want to keep it, I ask all my guys all the time on the various courses and workshops, did you when you grew up, did you actually want to be a support center analyst? And it's not always a yes. A lot of people sort of fall into it. It's like that. Yeah, I want to be the doctor, the pilot, the fire, whatever it is. It's like, no, not necessarily. They don't necessarily go stay there. But I've had the opposite as well. I've had back-end engineers that actually want to come onto the service desk now because of what's currently going on and how we're operating and what's happening. So this is that whole thing about the dynamism, and thank you, Daniel, upskilling, reskilling. If you want to be sustainable, you have to work on the fluidity, that dynamics of how we bring people in and how we bring them in, how we take them. Oh, okay, I was going to say that in a very...
Take them out with a gun.
That was not the way I meant it. But it was, how we actually help them leave is the better way of saying that. How we help them leave is just as important as how we help them come in. So we have to have the full, complete program for that dynamic, ever-changing balance.
Yeah. The phrase, if you love them, set them free, comes to mind. One of the best managers I've ever had, Shane Carlson, said that to me, and I'll never forget it because he wasn't wrong. Kincy, what have you got to add about turnover?
Yeah, I think earlier in my career, I embraced it, and I saw it as a way to kind of cycle people through the organization. I see support is often, and service desks are often places where people start their careers in a company, especially if they're not deeply technical or, marketing or something like that. So it's a great place. So I really try to position my organization as a talent generator. And I think that worked well in certain environments, like early mid-stage startups. I will say my last round, I focused a little bit more on trying to prevent turnover. And I think was largely successful. I mean, just through all the reasons we've just talked about. But I think there's some situational analysis that has to be done. And do you want to embrace it and use it as a tool, and then plan for it? I think that's the key thing. Is if you are experiencing turnover, like build plans for it and kind of assume it's going to happen rather than be surprised by it. And that's what I've done in the past. Just make sure I was prepared for turnover and how to plan for it.
Yes, it's one of those things that we need to do to be prepared for VUCA, for that volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity of our new world. I think the point that Daniel made is totally relevant. Like, it can be as fast as 2 clicks to find a new job. So just know that turnover is going to be there. Plan for it as best as you can, and hopefully you're doing the right things to make work fun, so people want to be there. Exactly. Okay, so let's talk about understaffing and overstaffing, because I think this is a huge thing when it comes to staffing models. You look at all the metrics, you look at your coverage hours, you look at 24-hour support, global support, and then you think about headcount. What is the right amount? I would love to hear if one of you just raise your hand if you've got experience about going from being understaffed to being overstaffed and how you balance that. Don't all raise your hand at once.
I
All
want the
right.
C-level version. Come on, Dan.
You want the what?
So
Yes.
I have a problem with the phrase understaffed and overstaffed, because then you're starting to talk about, what I call the Goldilocks syndrome.
Yes.
Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Or is it just right? And the question is, we're back to what Kincy and Jacob were mentioning, and Simone have been mentioning, is I don't know what right looks like tomorrow. If I know what right looks like tomorrow or next month, I need to go buy a lottery ticket. Because I'm that good.
Yeah.
Okay. And the question is, and I like what Quincy was saying about, is there a way for us to be able to say, we're going to put you on the bench, and that doesn't mean that we don't love you, dear, but what we want from you instead is we want you to help us make sure that some of the things that we're doing right now are correct. So get rid of all the old garbage data or documents or whatever that we have, okay? And in the meantime, can you go and update your architect certificate for cloud models? Or can you go and help us look at an AI chat GPT strategy? And the moment that we think that you have the right skills again, and you give those skills, you can use the professional services management framework from, and this is an unshade plug for ITSMF, or from the skills framework, initiative that's worldwide. You can use that to really see what is it that you want to do today versus what you want to do tomorrow, and what do you need to do that. And I think that's what Kincy is driving for, and Simone, all of us are driving for, really, is this under and overstaffing. That's got to go now. The business case for I need this many people for this project, that's like yesterday.
I like that. It's a completely different look at it. And I think when I was hearing your response, I'm thinking, okay, well, yeah, that totally makes sense. You've got the call volume, specifically daily work, I'll say, and then you've got project work and learning on top of that. And it's like, you can tell you're understaffed if they aren't investing in themselves, if they aren't able to contribute in those projects anymore, because they've got a huge backlog of tickets or queue to manage.
Well, but let's look at that for a second. I think all of us will agree that the only place in IT that has the truth is the service desk. They know all the good stuff and all the bad stuff, all the good people and all the bad people, all the good vendors and all the bad vendors, because that's all they do all day long. So if you use them in a way that encourages your organization to get their head out of their backside,
out of the sand,
okay, out of the sand, and actually let your service desk fluctuate as part of a team of individuals that is managing and creating a service or a product, okay, then your service and product is going to grow daily. Okay, and it just becomes a piece of work on a Kanban board, or as part of your value stream map, or whatever visual tool that you guys use. And I think that's the trick that a lot of people miss now, is their service desk is way over here somewhere. And it ought to be like front and center. It ought to be where the CIO, and I can name CIOs that spend, on average, they have their own metric, 3 to 4 hours a week in the service desk.
Okay.
Well, I think under hire, again, I agree, taking issue with that, because at the end of the day, you're given resources. So unless you're running the company, you're really not in a position to determine overhiring and underhiring. And there's cases where you're given probably too many resources and you hire and then you have to lay people off because the business got over its skis. So I think the key is, again, it's to stay aligned with the business priorities. Like, I can't underhire. I can only hire what the resources that have been given to me, but I can make a case and I can connect my outcomes to certain business drivers. So again, my last company, I really tried to draw a strong correlation between staffing and customer satisfaction. So, hey, if you want to cut some people, that's fine. I mean, I don't love cutting people. That's not what I wanted to do, but that's a business case, right? So like, these are going to be the outcomes if you reduce the staffing of my team.
Yeah.
Conversely, if you increase the staffing of my team, these are some outcomes we can look at getting. So I hear your thing. I definitely think you can overhire, but that's, again, you'll find that out later.
Yeah.
You won't know it right away. You'll find it out later when you're told to lay a bunch of people off because the business got over.
Do you know what?
Again,
they are
seriously
going to find this out with all the wonders of technology and the automation and AI that's coming in, all the stuff that we're sending, self-service, which is brilliant because people love to do things for themselves as well, and everything else that goes with that. But actually, Matt, you mentioned one particular metric, and we should never take a metric out of context because it all tells a story. And AHT, average handle time, is not a goal. That is not a goal. But yet so many still look at it and say, why is it taking so long on the call? And I'm like, no, this is not the goal. But what they haven't realized with this shift, that's why I said it's dynamic, with this shift with AI and everything else that they're wanting to do, average handle time is actually going to grow bigger. They've forgotten that all the simple stuff is actually moved to the self-service. And now guess what's going to happen to that leaderboard? It's like, well, hang on, average handle time is going to grow. Our average time of resolution is going to grow because we're dealing with more complex and complicated calls now. So as I've said to a few, anytime you have a team leader freaking out about, there's so many calls in the queue, it's like, okay, time to take a breath. What are we actually staffing for now? Think about it. We are staffing people for more complicated and complex style of calls. That means we've got to increase their cognitive thinking skill sets, their problem solving skill sets. We have to help widen this. It isn't just take a ticket and flick it. That's not, which was never the intent in the first place, but it was the way they were treated. And that's just not on. Yeah. And it certainly is not on anymore.
Jacob, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, all of this is really amazing stuff. It's in what everyone's saying, just it needs to be a constant vigilance on the skill gap, of where your team is at, because whether you are over or under, whatever you want to call it, or, as we get into more complex work, because we're automating away the easy stuff that happens, that just is the way it is. So you need to, constantly be, working with your team to identify what they know how to do, what they don't know how to do so well, and help build that up for them. Not only are you helping build up that individual to get to the next stage in their career, to the next rung on the ladder or whatever, but you're also helping out your team and the work that is actually still in front of you to be able to get through that. So malleability, moving resources around as needed. If you are overstaffed there, let's talk about getting new certifications and help honing in more skills in other areas, or cleanup or whatever, or even, possibly shifting to other parts of the organization or teams. Maybe there's places over there. But and that's just as important if you are understaffed, that you're putting your strongest skill sets to what is the bigger stuff coming at. Just rearranging the puzzle as you need, and making it sort of the outcome what you need it to be. I mean, in the business sense of things. But
yeah, that's a good segue for this question, actually, where someone is asking specifically.
Yeah.
They're interested to hear everyone's opinion on the role of succession planning. You've got these gaps maybe in your skills or competencies in your organization. So how do you plan for that as part of the staffing model? We're in the midst, and Shiraz says this specifically, we're in the midst of a generational shift where more millennials are moving upward in the org chart. So have you seen succession planning as part of call center strategy or staffing models?
I mean, for me, absolutely. I mean, and we talked about that a little bit, or we touched on it during the turnover question is, people will be in the support or service team for generally a short amount of time. But I'm a firm believer that is a fantastic organization to seed into other organizations. So that can be part of your succession planning. And then, as you have your needs met right now and you're trying to read the tea leaves of the future, you need to constantly be building everybody up and set that expectation for yourself. I'm probably only going to have this individual for 12 to 18 months or however long you see that there. Building out that onboarding, building out those skill gap analysis to refill their knowledge of areas that they have gaps on, and then letting them go off into the next stage of their career. And then backfilling that with the next person, and then constantly doing that. I was told once, I can't remember exactly where I heard it, but if you're not, a head manager go to me and say, what if I train them and they leave? I spend all this time training this individual, and then the response being, what if you don't train them and then they stay? So you have this person who is not really, performing what you need them to actually do, and what they're doing. But just constantly trying to plan that out and move everything around to make it fit what you need it to do.
Anyone else got tips for succession planning or cross training? Would love to hear what you've experienced.
If you do succession planning, you are the single point of failure.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you don't have someone lined up for your role and you leave, what's next? Totally. Yeah, what were you going to say, Mr. Breston?
I like the skills framework for the internet age. The Sophia. In being able to look at, this is where the organization is challenging me to go. What skills do I need? And then helping people either succeed in that succession planning, or going out and trying to find what skills are required. And that may include me jumping ship because I'm not right anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? You need to know when your time is done.
Okay. That's an interesting point. How many people have actually waited for their redundancy rather than leaving earlier? You should work yourself out of your role, if that makes sense to some people, because wanting to progress and move on in career, whether it's within the same organization or not, which is part of the whole succession understanding as well, is being able to say, am I willing to make myself redundant?
Yeah, that's a really humbling thing to think about, and selfless thing to think about. Like, hey, am I willing? And you see this too when there's layoffs. There are people managers and leaders who lay themselves off to preserve some of their team. Talk about selfless leadership. Holy cow. Love that stuff. Okay, let's go on to something more tactical, because we've been talking a lot of strategic, high-level stuff. Let's talk about coverage, baby. Coverage of the desk, coverage of the phones. I think this is one of the topics that's so important, but it's not very easy to translate, right? It's one of those it depends situations. I would love to hear your experiences though about coverage, what you've done, what you've learned, challenges you've overcome. Let's start with Kincy.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, I think, is a great way to start. I've used geographical models. I've used product line models. I've used kind of like time zone, and then different functional models. So different skill sets, like you need a particular thing. So I think the key is to look at your organization and see what makes sense. There is no coverage model to rule them all. It's going to be very dependent on the business, and what type of service you're trying to deliver. Do you have a 24/7 requirement? Are you good with just kind of, and again, like languages come into play. So how do you stretch languages across time zones and things like that? So like, I think the best advice I can give is, you know, just hit around some ideas. Don't do what you did at your last company. You know, think about it, just kind of wipe the slate clean and just look at what are the important vectors that I'm trying to cover, and then build a few different models to look at that, and then hit that around with your team. I think the other advice I would give is talk to your team about the coverage model, because you're not the one living it. I'm always surprised when people like just impose their will on the team. And I'm a total fan of will imposition in certain cases, but when people are working different shifts, like get their buy-in and input. Like even if it's a cacophony of voices, you can sift through that. And I think you can come to something, and people will surprise you. People will volunteer for weird things that you never thought they would have tolerated or done. So I just think team engagement, but also having a set of principles to drive your coverage model that you start out with. Again, what are we trying to accomplish as a business?
Okay.
We senior management never get it right, because we're always looking at this money thing. So the best two people to tell us what the coverage model should be, as Quincy said, is the people who have to live this day in, day out, and the customer. So if you, like First Direct does, the online bank here in Britain, literally goes out and asks customers on a weekly basis, this is what we're thinking of doing. What do you guys think? And they ask you 3 or 4 simple questions. It takes like 2 minutes to fill in their survey, okay? But from that, they drive their model. And from that, they're the number 1 or number 2 rated bank, online bank in the UK, okay? Because they're learning from the people that in a heartbeat can lead them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's design thinking. It's outside in thinking. Ask the customers, ask the agents. We saw this yesterday on Support Driven, a community of support professionals. And someone said, you know, how do we cover for holidays? They were dependent specifically on people volunteering, and no one was volunteering for specific holidays. And so it was hard to fill. Add to that, and I hadn't really thought about this because I, of course, respond with suggestions of what I've learned. But then someone pointed out, well, we have unlimited vacation. We don't give bonuses. So you have like less rewards to give staff to say, hey, could you cover this? And I think one of the things that came out of it was hiring diversely is a great thing. If you've got people that practice multiple different religions or from different regions or walks of life on your service desk, some of them don't celebrate those same holidays. So maybe they want to trade for different ones. There's tons of really good tips for this. Who else has some tips for coverage when it comes to staffing?
Yeah, it's something that when you've got and I love what Kincy said too, like with geographical language levels, they all play a part. But the cultural one that you just brought up, Matt, is particularly intensive. Because it doesn't matter even if you're not international, we still have so many multicultural issues to deal with as well. And you know, shift coverage, you know, it comes back to a couple of key things. There are legal things that must be covered. So this is where I find that a lot of success managers or support center managers actually suffer, is they don't always have the HR knowledge or the HR backup or understanding of the implications sometimes of how the scheduling happens. So there is an occupational health and safety side of it as well. And so, for example, even the core business patterns said that, look, on a Saturday or Sunday, we were, you know, almost 24/7, but we had, it was necessary from an occupational health and safety to have 2 people on the shift, regardless of what the core patterns are, minimum 2 people, so that with a person, if something happened, there was always someone on site or someone there that they could call on, and, you know, things like that. So I think this is something, yeah, okay, there's practical things, these are things that must be put in place and understood. So go and, check your HR, check with your legal, check with all the things that matter in regards to, covering those sorts of things as well, especially around holidays, the requirements, and so on. But, the other thing from a cultural perspective, and Kincy had it right, go and ask them. Hand over the stuff to your team leader, hand over the stuff. I used to say to the guys that they had different products, different time zones, and I'd say to them, look, here's the patterns, here's the demand, here's how many people I need across these days and these weeks and whatever. That's what's needed. We managed to get it out. Originally, it was 2 weeks. We managed to get out the schedule 4 weeks fairly solid. We had it out to 6 weeks where those 2 weeks were a bit, fluid. And we said, if you guys want to change shifts, if you've got something personal on, or if you've got this or that on, whether it's studying or family stuff, you can agree with each other to swap your shifts. I have no problem with that, as long as the business is covered as needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, share the responsibility. It seems like such a risk, but it really isn't, because you're on a team together. People want
give them the guidelines.
Yeah, they want to know. They want to know what's right, and they want to do what's right. Okay, next question, because this is a big one, and one that I'm seeing constantly now is a lot of people are bringing support back in house. Either they don't like their MSP, or they don't like who they sourced it to, or it's just a psychological change. Like, this is where we're going, this is where we're investing, and I want to tap Jacob's brain, because the dude has built from scratch. So the question that I get constantly is, where do I start? Do I start by hiring staff? Do I need to staff my desk, or do I get tooling? What do you recommend to someone who's either bringing something back in-house or starting their first service function?
Yeah. So again, like with anything else, it depends. It depends on what kind of work you have to do. It depends on the complexity and what kind of model you're actually needing to cover. Do you need 24/7? There's all sorts of questions that is going to kind of answer this for you. However, especially starting from scratch, you do need humans to help you figure it out. So you're not, a one-person band trying to staff 24/7. That's just not feasible. So, you need to ask your the questions of what's most important. You need to hit SLA and all that other fun stuff that's required. And then start lean with your staffing, 1 or 2 people, and then make your growth decisions as you move forward. But those initial hires, they in my opinion need to have good, like, just the very unique skill set of documenting and able to handle a lot of different processes and technologies from the get-go, and be a bit more less rigid in their responsibilities, and they will help you figure out what needs to be done as you're moving forward. So again, there's no real straight answer for this question. Maybe everybody else has some experience otherwise, but yeah, starting with your initial staff is probably the most important in my experience.
I really like that answer, because immediately you can imagine if I hire a good rock star, or I hire someone like myself, then we know that we can grow it. Yeah, Simone's like, oh, Matt, your ego's showing. No, but I'm saying, like, if the support leader, the person growing the organization, has that ambition, has that drive, maybe even would have done that 24/7 support, then you know that the person that they're hiring is going to do the same, and you can scale up that way. What does anyone else have opinions or ideas or experiences how to grow a service desk from 0 to some?
I like Jacob's answer. I want to caveat off of one of the things you said, though, about the tools. And the tools should come last.
Yes.
I think all of us know or have heard of Stuart Rance. And Stuart's favorite story at a conference, especially if he's holding a beer, is to tell you about how for years a service desk ran until they felt comfortable as to what they were doing on paper. everything that they did was paper-based. The way that they passed tickets to other parts of the organization, it was there was no tool involved. It was if it wasn't paper, it was an Excel or Word document that somebody went and created, and then that got passed around. And once they felt comfortable that this was the type of information that they needed, and this was the type of information that they wanted to store, then they started to look for a tool, and they used Moscow. Must, could, should, won't. What must we have? What could we have? What should we have? And what in no way, shape, or form should we spend money for?
Yeah.
Then what you do is you go to, back to your teams, and you give them the brochures or the websites of some tools and go pick your favorite 3. And of those 3, you bring it in for a pilot, and you let your teams vote on what the tool is that they want to have for them. And you also let your team vote on the type of skills that they need to have. And you let your team vote on whether or not they think that's helping people. And you let them use an NPS score. Because we're staffed like this, and because we're using this type of tool, this is the way we're acting. And the internal gods aren't beating the crap out of us, and customers aren't beating us up.
So it must be working.
It must be working.
I think this is a good point too, because if you start with something, then you can understand how you want to work. I had the pleasure of talking with David Mainville recently, and he pointed out and just reminded me the power of having your processes documented so that when you're looking at tools, or even when you're hiring people or shifting stuff around, you have this document to kind of reflect on it. It really builds a great foundation. Okay, we're going to stick to 2 more questions. The next one is partnering with HR. How do we partner with HR? What should we be looking to HR to provide? What should we be expecting of HR? Let's start with Simone. What have you seen that HR does well, maybe misses the ball on? Where should we be leaning on them?
That's a real tough one. It's been a very big part of my career. I come from an ITSM and HR background, so been in a lot of mergers and acquisitions, to put it politely. When I was first becoming a manager myself, I was like, yay, I get my own PA and all of this. I was so excited, that this would happen. Only to come into the period where HR was actually sort of crushed by a lot of organizations because, believe it or not, HR suffer many of the same issues and acts that IT does. And so the whole learning and development side of things, the training programs, being able to how we do our recruiting and all of that became very much just straight up hire, job role kind of stuff. There was not a lot of support from HR, and unfortunately, many of us managers and at line management, even going above and becoming a leader, are not given that HR experience. So but I've seen the regrowth of HR, and I so love it. Hacking HR is one of my favorite communities. Absolutely adore. And so the whole issue around pay, around what the job role requires, what skill sets we should have. Fortunately, HR don't know what we know we need. Mm-hmm. So we need to talk to them, yet they send us a form and say, fill out a nice template of a job role. And that doesn't always encounter the human side of stuff. And we need to have our relationship. I would push for anybody in ITSM or any leader role, please go sit with your HR and saying, what are all the different aspects I need to consider? What do I need to tell you so we get the right people in the right place at the right time doing the right things?
Love it. Oh, that's a good tip right there, right? Because that's basically what you're trying to do. And
collaborate.
Yeah, you collaborate on it. Like, let's
You're part of the
brainstorm.
same organization.
Yeah, you have to meet halfway. You need to teach them about service and support. They need to teach you about recruiting and staffing. I love it.
Yeah, become a destination company.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the key here. You want to be the place where people come to. The person is not a ticket, but a ticket represents a person's experience.
Yeah, that's a great one. I love that. You want to be that place that people want to be. Jacob, Kincy, have either of you got input that you want to leverage or share with the audience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like HR obviously is dependent on the stage of the company you're at. I do a lot of startups and things like that. But yeah, teaming with your HR and you know, as you especially are needing to build out your leadership and management teams, I am a huge advocate for doing as much promotion from within as you possibly can. As you know, if that wasn't clear, trying to get people to that next stage. And quite often when you're doing that you know doesn't have a lot of people don't tend to have a lot of that leadership or experience, which often comes from HR background or some sort of business background. So teaming with your HR teams to ensure that you're, you know, any trainings or resources that you can have in that regard, I have found to be very helpful. And then also working with HR because they are, you know, when you're attempting to develop your culture. So you have a very specific culture and you want it to be welcoming. We talk about the destination place to live. I mean, the HR is going to be trying to do that for the entire company. And then as you're teaming with your HR team, you can make sure that you're attempting to adopt and nurture all those culture things that they are attempting to do. Mm-hmm. So you can go ahead and, you know, disseminate that across your team or plural teams, right? Depending on what you need. So they're a fantastic resource for you. They are, you know, your people's team, and they're going to help you on the day-to-day do all of that. And then, you know, obviously they're your resource for when you find yourself in trouble and you need that help, which is of course what HR is there to try to help you out. So in terms of, you know, addressing problems or any of those other concerns, but we're getting into all that other exciting stuff of just managing people, which ugly parts too, and HR is definitely going to help you with that.
It's an art form and something that, you know, you can study your whole life, and man, you'll still hire a ringer, and one day they will challenge everything you know about leading people and managing people.
Definitely.
Kinsey, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think something to be cognizant of is the rise of talent in HR and people departments. So the function's becoming a bit bifurcated. So it's really important to think about working with talent managers that are not necessarily your classic HR business partners. So I think, you know, understanding that they have incentives and they may not align with your incentives, right? So in the kind of pre-pandemic, kind of middle pandemic, when people were hiring like bananas, a lot of talent people had really high expectations as far as like bringing people in the organization, because we all had to grow 10 million X. And the challenge is you may not want to grow that fast because you want to filter for quality, not quantity. Mm-hmm. And the talent incentives, contrary to what they say, may not align closely with what you're trying to do there. So, you know, one of the pieces of tensions I've experienced is interview length. You know, when it was like, get on the mill, we just got to hire people. Everyone wanted like 3 interviews tops. And my interviews cadence is typically 5 to 7. I mean, I'm even for entry roles, and I know like that's heresy in some, but that's what I like. And it works for me. I generally hire good people. So, but when your talent team's saying like, hey man, this is taking too long, you got to move faster. Like, you know, standing your ground there with them, I think is really important. And the way I do that is by scripting out, like having very well documented interview processes. So not interview scripts, but interview processes. So I can go to them and say, I am really good at interviewing and I'm really good at building these processes. And you guys are really good at sourcing candidates for me. So let's work together, but don't tell me how to interview because I'm the hiring manager. That's my job. And I think hiring managers outsource that stuff way too much at their peril. So take control of your hiring process. That would be the first thing, and document it so you're a credible player. You don't, again, it doesn't need to be a 70-page handbook, just a document saying, hey, we do this interview, then we do this interview and this interview. These are the outcomes we're looking for. That's simple enough. but you got to be credible if you're going to contest with people who see themselves as interviewing experts. I'll fight that fight every day, but I got to come prepared.
That's so true, and great advice. Stand up for yourself. You really do need to. And we've got a comment here that Peter made specifically that another issue is the pay rate of service desk and support professionals. They're very often very lowly paid, and there is often not a really possibility to grow in salary. And Daniel, I know that you mentioned you put in a response in chat, but Peter can't see it because he's on LinkedIn. So what was your response?
So let me get this right. The business decision is to pay the people that get the first phone call from a consumer or customer the least amount of money. That's a business decision. That is what's going to keep your organization, private or public, okay, in good terms. Mm-hmm. It's the same argument that's going on now with all the strikes here in England. We pay the nurses the least, but they're the people who live day in, day out, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the junior doctors second least. Okay, so they're striking. Hey guys, this isn't right. So I think all the service desk people should strike.
Wow, interesting. I have had that in the back of my mind very recently, that's something that we might be able to pull off. I thought about a union, like imagine a union, and think about the benefits of a union in the service industry. Mental health, pay, reasonable hours.
You could put that into that model that you're building.
I know it's very European in me to say it, so I just had to put it out there.
Matt, it's really quite interesting to think about that. I actually ask that question every training course that I have. I do ask that question because I had in one national support desk that had my team in Sydney was freewheeling and whoever they wanted to be and whoever I had, but my team in Melbourne were unionized. They were actually part of a union, and which is another thing that I think a lot of support center managers and things don't realize. The other things that can take place, like what's the differences between your teams wherever they are, and it took a different focus and of management for one team versus the other team, just purely because of the nature of that, which was I found really interesting. And the other thing is, I don't think a lot of organizations realized, and for those of us that have been in the uniform services before, we understand what it is to be first responders. We understand what it means to be on the front line. Yet what a lot of people didn't focus or didn't see was how much service desk was on the front line during that pandemic crisis and any other crisis, because they are the central point of communication. They are that pivot point. They did so many things, and there's many stories out there, and I do ask people to look at those IT support stories. But our service desk is one of the most underfunded life and business saving interaction points. The pressure, the angst, the incredible acrobatic skills, the emotional agility that these guys develop and display, that, look, I'm not a human resource. I come from that environment too. I'm not a human resource. I'm not something to be consumed and plundered. I'm not an asset, okay? I'm a human being, not a thing ticked off on the financial checklist. And I'm not human capital. You don't own me, and you don't get more of me when I'm gone.
Yeah. Peter's counterpoint to this is that not many people in the service and hospitality industry would leave their post or would go on strike, right? So many of us are selfless.
Because of our passion and our focus and our talent to be where it is. So should we get paid for the talent that we have? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you put it. Okay. So we're close to time, but I do want to give you all just a moment. So real quick, where can people connect with you and learn more? Simone.
You can go LinkedIn normal, snapshot bio, it's all there. Any other questions, you can also go to my website, which is just www.simonejomore.com.
All right. Kincy, where can people find you?
LinkedIn's by far the easiest way to find me.
Mr. Jacob White?
Same. LinkedIn would be the best place. It has all my contact info and ways to get a hold of me and schedule a call.
Mr. Breston?
I call Matt.
Yeah, just call me. I'll put you in touch with Daniel if you call me. Definitely. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for your time, for being on this podcast and taking the time to provide your insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for our audience, did you know that you can join a live episode? That's exactly what we were doing here. So hopefully you figured that out by this point. And speaking of ticket volume, did you know that this podcast is brought to you by Invigate? It's a fit-for-purpose service desk solution with integrated asset management designed to let you focus on supporting your organization without arduous implementations. In fact, service teams from Toyota, NASA, and McDonald's use Invigate to manage requests, automate workflows, and centralize inventory data so that they can focus on delivering better service. Because good service is good business. Have a great weekend, everybody.